through the next 15, 20 minutes. Some thoughts on what is good corporate governance and how and in what perspective I see an application of Gandhian thought. Let me begin with a very fundamental question. What is the purpose of business? I just put down a couple of thoughts here. As a provider of goods and services required by society, as a contributor to national wealth creation through efficient use of inputs and optimized outputs, and perhaps in the process, make some money for the entrepreneurs, for example, shareholders in a corporate format. Now, we teach our students shareholder wealth maximization is a primary concern of corporate business. We also teach them, or try to teach them, and many of them excel, the teachers later on, how to make money for themselves and their corporations. So, is there something wrong with the wealth creation objective? That was the question I would like to ask myself. Is it so wrong to create wealth for ourselves and for the society we live in? My own personal feeling is that wealth creation should not be scoffed at. If we go back to our own scriptures, it is stated to be one of the purusharthas or life objectives of human beings. But the problem is when it becomes an obsession to the exclusion of other concomitant ground rules, like playing the game by the rules. How do you make that money is perhaps a key question that we ought to address ourselves to, rather than ask ourselves, should we be making money? Second question is, what do we do with the wealth that we so create? As we all know, we've been constantly reminded of this from time to time. We came into this world with nothing, and when we leave, unfortunately, we can't effect electronic transfers. We go alone to wherever we came from, presumably the earth. Gandhiji personally believed, I believe, that creating wealth was not bad. He did want people to be self-sustaining, to take care of themselves. How do you take care of yourself in a world where the medium of living is money? You need money. You either inherit it or you make it, or beg, borrow, steal. But he also put in a caveat that any wealth that you acquire beyond whatever you require reasonably for your maintenance is money that belongs to the society, to the people. It should go back to the people. Talked about trusteeship in that context earlier on. What is reasonable? A reasonable standard of living in the US may be completely different from a reasonable standard of living in a village in any part of India. So I would imagine that we have to live with some kind of contextuality as to what is reasonable and leave it to the good judgment of the people themselves to say, what is it that I want to have in terms of having a comfortable living, and then extend it to not only myself, that will be too selfish, so extend it to my immediate family, maybe the immediate community. I don't mean community in a communal sense, the society in which I live, and then further on to the village, to the city, to the state, the country, and the world at large. So the first point I want to make in a corporate governance sense, when we talk about creating wealth for shareholders, is absolutely essential, is there is nothing that I can find in Gandhiji's teaching which goes or militates against it. Milton Friedman was quoted by Professor Tripathi. He said something very, very sensible to my mind, but we generally quote the first part of his statement and normally do not reflect on the second part. He did say the one and only responsibility of business is to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits. That's the part which is quoted very often. But he also went on to say, so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. How many of us really get access to this later part? We only talk about the business of business is to do business and make money. That's very often quoted. But not everyone is talking in such exclusive terms. For example, take a reputed industrialist like Dave Packard of Hewlett & Packard. He said in 1939, making money is an important result of a company's existence, but institution exists to make a contribution to society. Okay. Here is another one. The OECD Advisory Group on Corporate Governance, as late as in 1998, and this was chaired by the famous American lawyer and corporate governance guru, Ira Milstein. Companies do not act independently from societies in which they operate. Corporate actions must be compatible with societal objectives. I'm quoting from the report of a committee which included other eminent luminaries like Sir Adrian Cadbury and so on. Even more recently, in 2007, GE, which is probably among the topmost market capitalized companies in the world, Chairman Jeff Immelt says, our experience with eco-imagination shows that we can develop products to address environmental challenges and make money in doing so. And our own J.R.D. Tata in 1965 is quoted as saying, no success or achievement in material terms is worthwhile unless it serves the needs or interests of the country and its people, and is achieved by fair and honest means. So there is a bunch of people, successful industrialists, successful businessmen who have made money. None of these people are known to have made enormous losses and ran away with shareholders' funds and so on. They believe that making money is good, but making money in the right manner, in a sensible manner, is important. Now, I would touch upon another concept we generally talk about in corporate governance, which is one of stewardship. We say that the board is to discharge a duty of stewardship. Essentially, what is a corporation? I would think it's just, in its simplest form, it's pooling of money resources from people so that entrepreneurial and risky innovations and businesses could be undertaken and executed by experts in the field. Herein lays the concept of fiduciary responsibility of the directors in overseeing the faithful execution of business activities to achieve intended business objectives. Directors, in this sense, are trustees and act in good faith with care and loyalty to the company and its shareholders. I should perhaps add, they are expected to, like known to be, they are expected to do this. There has been and continues to be an ongoing debate about the accountability of directors, whether it is exclusively to shareholders, which is based on the legal scholarship theory of residual claimants, as opposed to a wider spectrum of stakeholders propounded by several people like Freeman. The latest we have is Margaret Blair of the Brookings Institution in Washington. As trustees of stewards, directors have to be diligent as a normal, rational human being. Nothing great is expected. That is why you see it's so easy to get onto the boards of companies. You don't need any particular qualification. There are some disqualifications listed, but there's no particular qualification to get onto the board of a company, especially as a non-executive director. But a reasonable diligence is expected of them, and they should exhibit due application and care in matters of both creating wealth and protecting created wealth and distributing it to the rightful claimants. Most importantly, they are accountable to the shareholders, and if you accept the wider stakeholder concept, also to the relevant shareholders in a larger sense. I mean, I emphasize the word relevant shareholders because anybody can qualify as a stakeholder in the normal sense, for their actions as much as their inactions. In particular, they should avoid self-dealing and tunneling. Tunneling is a word that we use in corporate governance literature. It actually means we are more familiar with siphoning of funds. Tunneling is the same as siphoning. Competing and conflicting interests. You sit on two different boards of companies with competing interests. One often wonders whose interests are you really taking care of. And should submit to independent auditing by qualified experts reporting to the shareholders. They should account and report honestly and fairly to their principals. I'm just touching upon a few principles of good governance. In a wider stakeholder responsibility framework, directors and the executive should also ensure that they do not violate the rights and entitlements of fellow human beings through workplace harassment, unfair human resource policies, denial of equal opportunities, engagement of child labor and hazardous activities, and so on. They also need to avoid, to my mind, and that's what I infer and deduce from Gandhiji's teachings on nonviolence, they also need to avoid violating nature and natural resources which are the property of society, which they hold and use as trustees for future generations. Now, let me quickly pick up 3 or 4 concepts that I have learned from Gandhiji's own philosophy and his writings. It's a veritable ocean. The more you dive and delve into it, the more you seem to find. So it is a constant struggle to keep on finding what he meant. We just pick up a few. Let us begin with trusteeship. Yes, there is a bit of fuzziness in trusteeship. But let us interpret it. Let us interpret what is relevant to us in the modern context. Gandhi's view was that all wealth in excess of what is reasonably required, as I mentioned earlier, for one's self and immediate family was held in trust for others. The money came from others, namely customers in gross realization terms, and set off against input costs and other charges, and the society in terms of natural resources used up or violated. And hence, that excess wealth had to go back to society in some form. In this sense, I believe trusteeship also means that one has to be truthful and responsible to these and similar others on whose behalf or with whose help the business operations have been conducted or expected to be conducted in future. The second concept is truth. I'm just touching upon this. We are going to be spending more time on this in the following sessions. The second concept of truth, Gandhiji distinguished between absolute truth and relative truth, though I must confess I have not understood it fully. I am in good company because I have read many people saying that there was not much clarity sometimes in Gandhiji's thinking. Maybe that is so. The truth that we are concerned with in corporate governance is the relative truth. If you say absolute truth is to deal with God. To my mind, truth is a concordance of impression or opinion with unadulterated fact. Like when people on oath affirm to the whole truth and nothing but the truth in quotes. The next concept is ahimsa or non-violence. Ahimsa has been described as the attribute of the soul and therefore to be practiced by everybody in the affairs of life. The valid question is whether corporations can be credited with a soul. I would be guided by a great author like Henry David Thoreau, who once said that while corporations perhaps did not have a conscience, those which had conscientious men could be taken as corporations with a conscience. So I would say, if corporations don't have a soul, but if the people who are running the corporations have a soul, maybe we can credit corporations with a soul. After all, corporations as inanimate entities created by a sleight of law have to act and express themselves through their human representatives. And it is those men and women who in fact provide leadership for all the corporate initiatives, whether they are good or they are bad. A couple of important points about ahimsa or non-violence needs to be highlighted, I think. First is Gandhi's concept was not limited to physical violence, but also covered other forms of violence. For example, psychological or traumatic violence, such as involved in instances of workplace harassment, as well as an acquiescence to violence either by active support or by tacit inaction in the face of such violence. Besides, we can also infer that violence against non-humans was not excluded from Gandhian thinking, as in the case of cruelty to animals, as well as impairment of the environment through operations involved in business processes, products, and services. Other concepts like satyagraha and non-malicious dissent are very useful for directors sitting on boards. I'm not saying directors should go on satyagraha in boardrooms, but what I mean by this is, if a director on a board does not think what is being done is appropriate, he or she owes it to himself or herself and to the company and to the people whom they represent to stand up and be counted. And if they are overruled by a majority, to say, okay, but please record my dissent. That is my view. That is transparency. This is certainly not an exhaustive list, but I'm just picking up some thoughts, and as Professor Chandra said earlier, if this begins a thinking process as to what kind of concepts from Gandhiji can be applied to modern corporate governance, we may make some forward-looking steps. Let me quickly recount this. Directors are accountable as trustees, comes in the concept of trusteeship. Corporations have to be truthful in their accounting and reporting to shareholders in the outside world. So your communications become important. Right? You need to create wealth because people have entrusted, other people have entrusted their money to you for that purpose. So you owe them a duty. So create wealth. Directors and officers as trustees may not indulge in deception, self-dealing, or tunneling, or poaching, and so on. We have various regulations, but I am not a great one for regulations. I'm saying these things should come from within. Corporations may not violate the rights of their employees. One would include also those employed on behalf of contract staff or outsourced agencies, as Sarbanes-Oxley does, incidentally. Environment, and neither are you permitted to violate the environment. where such violations are unavoidable in the business process, then seek concurrence from the affected with transparent disclosures and reparatory measures. Directors in particular have the responsibility to express their views and matters, and where overruled by the majority, as I said, record their dissent. Following the laid down dharma, Gandhiji laid a great stress on dharma. What is dharma? Legal or regulatory framework, what is right? I think if people could only think of that, that would be great help. Let me finally ask this question. Does it all pay? Should governance be relevant at all? Should companies worry about it? Is there a business case for, I hate to use the word Gandhism in the light of what was said, but for want of a better word, I'll use the term Gandhism. Is there a business case for Gandhism in corporate governance? Personally, sir, I believe so. Leadership companies around the world and in India have incorporated many of these tenets in their governance. We have one such representative amidst us here, Mr. Subaya, who is going to be talking to you later in the afternoon. Leadership companies, what distinguishes leadership companies? Are they the leaders because they follow good governance practices, or do they follow them because they are leaders? We can debate this endlessly, but the fact is, or the truth is, one good thing leads to another. Sometimes one is asked, how is it that corporations which are not reputed to follow good governance practices still manage to be at the top of the pack? One could only speculate how much better or how much higher their reputation and therefore their performance would have been if only, besides their excellent financial bottom lines, their governance frameworks had been more attuned to truth, transparency, and trust issues. Governance is critical to corporations as it is to nations. Sooner or later, often sooner than later, the society weeds out the undesirables, the untrustworthy, and the untruthful. If you require any evidence, I will invite you to look at the churn in the Fortune 500 companies in the last 3 decades and see how many of the earlier greats continue in later years. Even if you wish to have an even more unpleasant proof, let's look at the financial distress of the United States corporations in the last few weeks for a gruesome reminder that the day of reckoning for the unprincipled, unethical, or overly greedy does indeed arrive. It is not that we have been above board in this country. Let me also tell you, we keep talking about all this stuff outside India. It's not that we are above board. In our country, such bailouts are not accurately costed in the public domain. Maybe it's all costed in the ministries, I do not know. And they do not come out reasonably soon enough either. So human memory is being short, we tend to forget. It was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. who said, I quote, Gandhi was inevitable. If humanity is to progress, Gandhi is inescapable. He lived, thought, and acted inspired by the vision of humanity evolving toward a world of peace and harmony. We may ignore Gandhi at our own risk, unquote. Ladies and gentlemen, I think a dose of Gandhian governance, self-adopted and not inflicted by mandate, would therefore be a good prescription for modern-day corporations aspiring to reach or retain their top billings in the corporate world, as we remember and revere Gandhiji today on his 139th birthday. Thank you very much for your patience.